This morning you boarded an airplane, you settled comfortably into your seat, picked up a cup of coffee and looked out the window, enjoying the view of the clouds. Within just a few hours, you traveled from one side of the world to the other. But have you ever stopped to think that thousands of years ago, people had no airplanes, no cars, and not even roads to cover that exact same distance? All they had was a pair of bare feet. With nothing but those 2 feet, our ancestors crossed thousands of miles. They journeyed through vast forests and climbed snow-covered mountains. But the real question is, without maps, without a compass, and without GPS, how did they manage to find their way across such enormous distances? Let's begin from the very start. Around 300,000 years ago, modern humans, or Homo sapiens, first appeared in Africa. At that time, there were no roads like the ones we have today, no maps, no cities, and not even established paths that could take people easily from one place to another. The only thing they truly had was their own body. But here's the most fascinating part. Scientists say that the human body was not built to be the fastest among animals. Instead, it was designed to travel long distances. The arch beneath our feet acts like a spring with every step we take, reducing the amount of energy required for walking and allowing us to cover great distances more efficiently. Our Achilles tendon stores energy with every step and releases it into the next one, making it possible for us to walk for hours without stopping. And that's not all. The human body contains approximately 2 to 4 million sweat glands. While animals such as horses and deer become exhausted and start panting in extreme heat, humans cool themselves by sweating, allowing them to keep walking for much longer. This is why researchers often describe humans as one of nature's greatest endurance walkers. At this point, you might be wondering, if humans were capable of walking such incredible distances, did they actually travel from one place to another, or even from one country to another, in ancient times? To answer that question, we have to travel back thousands of years to Africa. According to scientists, the story of modern humans began in a small region of Africa. This means that at some point in history, our ancestors left their homeland and began one of the greatest journeys the world has ever seen. Traveling in small groups of only 20 to 30 people, they slowly left the place where they were born and set out toward unknown lands. Along the way, they would often stop for several days to hunt for food and search for fresh water before continuing their journey. Archaeological research shows that around 60,000 to 70,000 years ago, this migration expanded rapidly. Humans left Africa and reached the Middle East. From there, they spread across the vast landscapes of Asia, crossed into the freezing climates of Europe, traveled through the dense jungles of Southeast Asia, and eventually reached distant lands such as Australia. But one important question still remains: were they simply wandering without a destination? The answer is no. Our ancestors never walked aimlessly. They traveled by relying on nature and on their extraordinary powers of observation. Today, whenever we visit a new city, we simply take out our phones and open Google Maps. But the greatest tool ancient humans possessed was their memory. As they traveled, they carefully memorized the important landmarks along their route: a mountain with a unique shape in the distance, 2 tall trees standing side by side, unusual rock formations, or the course of a river. By connecting these landmarks together, they created what scientists call a mental map. This was not a map drawn on paper. It was a living map stored inside their minds. Generation after generation, this knowledge was passed down, refined, and expanded. In many ways, the maps and GPS technology we rely on today exist because our ancestors first learned how to navigate the world using nothing but memory and observation. However, this mental map worked only as long as there were no major obstacles standing in their way. You might be able to cross mountains. You might even make your way across a desert. But when a massive river stands in front of you, knowing the direction alone is no longer enough. At first, our ancestors tried to cross rivers by finding shallow sections. In some places, they stepped across large rocks. In others, they used fallen tree trunks as natural bridges. But these methods were not enough. Sometimes they had to wait for days until the water level dropped, because one wrong decision while crossing a river could put the entire group in danger. According to archaeologists, most ancient human settlements were located near rivers. The reason was simple. Rivers were not only a source of fresh water, but also a source of food, one of the best places to hunt wild animals, and they provided fertile land. However, despite all these advantages, rivers also became the greatest obstacle to their journey. Without crossing them, reaching new lands became almost impossible. The truth is, there is no direct archaeological evidence showing exactly how our ancestors crossed those rivers. Wooden rafts and other objects made from wood simply do not survive for tens of thousands of years, but one thing is certain, they did cross them. If they hadn't, humanity would never have spread across the world the way it did today. Scientists believe that our ancestors had extraordinary powers of observation. They may have noticed that a fallen tree trunk floated instead of sinking, and they learned from what they saw. Their earliest watercraft were probably nothing like the well-built boats we know today, but they were good enough to get people across rivers. They may have floated across on large logs, or tied several dry logs together with vines to create a simple floating platform. These early rafts were crude and primitive, but they were capable of carrying people safely across the water. Archaeologists have never found one of these first wooden rafts or boats because materials such as wood, bamboo, and vines cannot survive underground for thousands of years. However, scientists do know one important fact. Very early humans managed to reach islands that had never been connected to the mainland by land. That alone tells us something remarkable. Somehow, our ancestors mastered the ability to float and travel across water. Now let's move to the most dangerous challenge of all, the open sea. Our ancestors had already mastered the skill of crossing rivers, but an even greater obstacle now stood before them. As they continued their journey toward Australia, they faced a terrifying reality. At that time, Australia was completely separated from the mainland. To reach it, they had to cross dozens of kilometers of open ocean. According to archaeological research, humans had already reached Australia around 65,000 years ago. This tells us that our ancestors had already learned how to travel across the sea. So let's see how they did it. Although those ancient wooden boats and rafts no longer exist because wood cannot survive for tens of thousands of years, the evidence left behind tells an extraordinary story. Ancient human settlements discovered in Australia prove that people successfully reached the continent, meaning they somehow crossed those vast stretches of water. At this point, another question naturally comes to mind. Even if our ancestors managed to cross the sea, how did they find the Australian coastline while surrounded by nothing but endless ocean? Today, if a ship loses its way, modern navigation technology can easily guide it back to land. But ancient humans had none of these tools. Instead, they relied entirely on nature. During the day, the position of the sun gave them a sense of direction. When night fell, the stars became their most reliable guide. After traveling for countless years, they learned which stars appeared during different seasons and where they rose in the night sky. But they did not rely only on the sky. The ocean itself constantly gave them valuable clues. Experienced travelers carefully observed the direction of the waves, the changing patterns of the wind, and the flight of seabirds. Many seabirds spend the day far out at sea but always return to land before nightfall. Whenever our ancestors saw these birds flying in a particular direction, they knew that land was probably nearby. According to researchers, they did not master these remarkable skills in a single day. Their understanding of nature was built through countless experiences, painful mistakes, and knowledge passed down from one generation to the next, allowing them to read the signs of the natural world with incredible accuracy. Now let's move on to another major challenge, carrying food. Our ancestors conquered the land by walking, and they conquered the water with rafts and boats, but now they faced a problem that no one had yet solved. You might be able to walk 20 miles, but you cannot carry a freshly hunted 200-pound animal on your shoulders for the same distance. For most of human history, people could bring back only as much weight as their own bodies could carry. But our ancestors eventually found a clever solution to this problem. Instead of lifting a hunted animal onto their shoulders, they placed it on animal hides or sturdy branches and dragged it across the ground. By doing this, the weight was spread across the ground instead of resting entirely on the human body. As a result, a single person could move much heavier loads than before. Archaeologists believe, based on wear patterns found on ancient animal hides and other evidence, that this type of dragging technique was used for thousands of years. Later, humans developed an even more advanced method, known today as the travois. Two long wooden poles were tied together in the shape of the letter V, with the load placed between them before being dragged across the ground. Although it looked simple, this invention increased the amount of weight a person could transport by several times. However, another major problem soon appeared. Dragging heavy loads across rocky ground, dense forests, or thick mud was still extremely difficult. That was when our ancestors came up with another brilliant idea. They built a small platform between two long wooden poles using animal hides and branches, allowing them to pull heavy loads much more easily over rough terrain. Today, archaeologists recognize this design as the travois. Even though it looked ordinary, its impact on ancient human life was enormous. Research has shown that many indigenous communities in North America continued using this same method until the arrival of Europeans, leading scientists to conclude that this technology is far older than previously believed. But this problem was not solved by inventing a new tool. It was solved by forming a partnership with another living creature. Around 15,000 years ago, humans gradually began domesticating dogs. At first, dogs were not only valuable hunting companions, but they also became trusted partners during long journeys. This was especially true in the frozen northern regions, where carrying heavy loads by hand was extremely difficult. Teams of dogs pulled sleds, transporting both people and supplies across vast snowy landscapes. A journey that could take a person an entire day to complete could often be covered much more easily with the help of dogs. However, dogs also had their limitations. They could travel quickly, but they could not carry very heavy loads.
The dog changed everything, but what happened next? To find out what strategy our ancestors adopted after the dog, part 2 is coming soon.